Hey, everybody. It is a Salt City Hoops podcast, video, whatever this is, however you're consuming it. We're here to talk about an active week in Jazzland because the Jazz did things, and we're the type of people who like to talk about things that the Jazz do when the Jazz do things. And so that is why we're here. And to help me pick that apart, a couple of my favorite people to talk Jazz with, talk basketball with, talk NBA with. One of them is coming to us from Denver, Colorado, who, as a Niners fan, is mere hours away now from going up against a whole nation full of Swifties. Brave. Mark Pereira, how you doing?
I'm great, and yeah, I've never actually lived in Utah. I've always been a Jazz fan from afar, but I'm now closer than I ever have been here in Denver. And the Super Bowl will be one thing, but I got a bunch of friends coming over tomorrow, and honestly, they are also all NBA junkies, and we're gonna watch the game. We love football, of course. We're gonna be talking a lot of the NBA trade deadline. I think even more than the football game tomorrow.
All right, well, that sounds like a plan. So you gotta watch the ads, you gotta watch the football game, and then you gotta, in between bites of wings, you gotta talk about the NBA too. Sounds like a fun evening. The other person who's joining us from the other direction, a man who has a third of the same names as me, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. Ken Clayton, how are you doing?
I'm good. I was trying to figure out a third of the same names. I guess just one out of three for each of us. Got it.
Just one. Yeah.
Math is hard on Saturday night.
From our resident accountant, even. And then I'm Dan Clayton, managing editor of Salt City Hoops. I'm the boring one because I'm here in Salt Lake City, Utah, where the Utah Jazz happen to play, about half their games.
For now.
And we'll talk a little bit about, as far as I know. And we'll talk about some basketball games too. But I think importantly, we wanted to kind of use this week's transactions as a jumping off point to figure out what the heck is up in the Utah Jazz universe. At this point, we probably don't need to, if you're watching this, you probably know what happened. So we won't literally rehash the trades for you. But at a broad level, the Jazz trade out 3 rotation players. They get somewhere between 0 and 2 usable NBA bodies back. We'll talk about that. But they also got some assets and some draft capital and a guy that they're kind of interested in who's overseas. They got the draft rights to him. So, in the aggregate, it was, useful players out, although, and we'll talk about this, probably not like the guys who are really carrying you to a 26 and 27 record so far, but who have contributed, right? And getting back a bunch of stuff that probably doesn't help you as much today, which leaves the interesting question of kind of what's going on over the next 2 months, and we'll dive into that. But let's just start with kind of from a pure transactional sense. Mark, Ken, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Ochai, Agbaji, Kelly Olynyk, Simone Fontecchio, no longer part of the Jazz's rotation. What did you think of the return? Was it in line with what you expected the Jazz to get as we started to hear names like those floated in the rumor mill?
Well, you start with a day before the deadline and Fontecchio getting traded a day before, and it almost felt refreshing to have a transaction where Utah was one of the leaders of the action for the deadline, because how many times have we let a trade deadline go past in the past 20 years where, Alec Burks getting healthy is our trade deadline move, right? And it just was like, we're part of the action. We're part of the front of it all. And you had heard that Fontecchio was perhaps maybe movable for the right piece, and you're thinking, well, we brought him over when no other NBA team had looked at him, and yeah, he's a little bit older. He's 28 years old, but he's going to be a restricted free agent this summer. We can work him into our future plans with Lauri Markkanen. He's our only body of that size who is worth playing. The return better be something solid. And turns out you might get the best pick of the second round in this upcoming draft, which stunned me. I just did not think that was on the table for a return for trading away a pending restricted free agent who he's solid, he's fine. He had a miserable statistical season last year, but he's fine. And I would have expected a contender to trade a bad second or a couple bad seconds for Fontecchio, but for a truly awful team in Detroit, trading away not their pick necessarily, but an option of a couple bad second round picks. We don't have to get into why Detroit did it, but getting that level of return, especially with the additional flexibility of second round picks going forward and what you can do with them, that's a quality rotation player in most cases, and who will be 10 years younger, 8 years younger than Fontecchio is. I'll miss him, but I'm not saying that's a sexy pick, but that's something that I just didn't expect was on the table, and I was happy.
Ken.
Yes. No, I feel the same. I mean, I kind of figured we were in one or maybe two second round pick territory if they were able to move Simone, but I didn't expect them to be really good ones. So the asset they got was definitely one that, as second round picks go, it's currently slotted at number 32. Detroit has been playing a little better of late. Not, I mean, even before the deadline, but now today's game they gave the Clippers a little bit of a run. So maybe that can even improve. I think it's only one game between them and Washington, and then Washington could go down to the 31 and 32. Either way, you're looking at the first 3, 4, maybe 5 picks of the second round. That's a place where you can get some value. So I think it was a move. David Locke had a point on Locked On Jazz as well. As soon as a team with cap room calls you interested in Simone Fontecchio, that tells you they might use some of that cap room to get him this summer, or if not get him, at least make him an offer that you might not want to match. So doing it this way, getting a good second round pick out of it is you gain an asset instead of losing it in the summer for nothing if indeed Detroit offered and you chose not to match.
Yeah, I think I agree with both your points. I think generally, if you have a pick at the very tail end of the first round, a first round pick, you can usually get multiple seconds in exchange for that pick, right? We've seen multiple trades in recent years where 27 moves for 3 seconds, or 28 moves for a couple of seconds in cash, or things like that. So, by that math, 32 is not that different from that range. So you could argue that getting the single best second rounder that moved this week might be worth more than a second rounder. And then the Jazz also got Gabriele Procida, who is someone that interests them, and frankly, I think is someone they could probably, if they were just in a liquidate everything mode, which I don't think they are, I think they could probably get a second for Procida, because he's someone that is interesting to NBA teams right now. So in the aggregate, I had heard pre-deadline that it was that the price point on Fontecchio was probably 2 seconds, and I do think that they got 2 second round things, meaning they got the pick and then they got this guy who was a recent number 36. But I think when in terms of value, they might have actually even gotten beyond excuse me, might have even gotten beyond the value of just 2 generic second rounders. And then in the other trade, I'm anxious to hear you both talk about this one too. In the Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji trade to Toronto, the Jazz got some players back too. We'll see if those players wind up contributing at all to the Utah Jazz on the court. But in that one, they got a first round pick, and it's not going to be a great first round pick. It's not going to be a first round pick that changes the world. But interestingly, there were only 3 first round picks traded this week. And the other 2 both involved the team that got the pick also taking back at least 1 year. And in Dallas's case, or sorry, in Charlotte's case, rather, trading with Dallas, they took on a multiple year commitment. So, from an asset standpoint, I think the Jazz did well, scoring, some of the best assets that moved. The question is just, I think the heartburn that exists out there, and we can decide together if this is fair heartburn or, just people being over emotional about losing players that we get rightfully attached to. The heartburn that is associated with the week is just, seeing guys that we had started to like and imagine their basketball futures, and finding out that their basketball futures were going to take place not in Utah.
I think you rightfully have to review this as two separate transactions, which is fitting because that's how the trade actually had to be consummated for dork reasons. You have to have thoughts about Olynyk and you have to have thoughts about Agbaji. I think it's really hard to think of a 32-year-old and a second-year player as a conglomerate, right? And again, we don't have to get into what the other team is thinking, but it's also very interesting that Masai Ujiri is kind of trying to operate on two separate timelines with these two players that are very disparate from one another. With Olynyk, I feel very similar to Olynyk that I do with Fontecchio. I think cap space for the Utah Jazz this summer is so important because of the pending renegotiation extension of Lauri Markkanen. Long story short, they can use their cap space to give him a whole lot of money up front and give him a contract extension off of that. It's going to be a big boy version of what they did with Jordan Clarkson last summer. So they will not need to use their entirety of their pending 40 million-esque cap space to do the entire renegotiation extension, but having that flexibility is really, really important. I don't think Fontecchio at the price that Dan was mentioning was possible this summer, that the salary he was going to command in restricted free agency and tying that cap space up. I don't think he was going to be re-signed. It's possible. I don't think it would have been likely. Certainly with the competition out there, as Ken was mentioning, with Detroit making a play for it. And I don't think Olynyk at his age is in a plan that you want to give him a 2, 3, 4 year contract. And so you're trying to put him in a position of getting the most assets back. I think it is telling about, and we're going to get into what is the future of the Jazz for this season and what is their angle, how much are they trying to win. I think it's telling that instead of taking a couple bad seconds for Kelly Olynyk, that they were willing to say, hey, we'd rather keep Kelly Olynyk if all you're offering is bad stuff. And if you're suggesting that if we just make this a different trade, that we get a better ass out of it, then it's on the table. I think it's really being honest from the Jazz about saying we're only in this to get real stuff, right? And there were non-trades of Clarkson, non-trades of Dunn, and we're saying that we're only going to get real stuff that'll matter for this team built around Lauri Markkanen and his renegotiation this summer. Now, how you feel about the trade, and this is where I really need people to couch me on this, is how you feel about Agbaji. And I see a 500 basketball team that was giving Ochai Agbaji 12 minutes a game. And he really, really couldn't find a way to play more than that. And he's not a true three, but with the paucity of credible small forward minutes on this team, he couldn't get on the court. And I just think that's telling at someone of his age. And he's shooting poorly. He's not a good matchup defender. Love his block rate. We love his, chase down blocks. We love his weak side blocks. I just don't feel that excited about him to be part of the Lauri Markkanen future. And even if I don't feel great about the weight value of the players that and the pick that's coming back, I think it's an appropriate direction to take because Olynyk wasn't coming back, and I don't think Agbaji's part of the future.
Yeah, I agree 100% on Olynyk. It really made, as the deadline got closer and you heard more and more rumors about it and you thought about it, there was very little reason. I was going to say zero reason, but I'm going to couch that just a tiny bit. Very little reason to keep Kelly Olynyk around. He was going to be value. He was going to have value to, we thought, and probably did, to contenders, but he didn't end up on a contender because he had value elsewhere too. But yeah, you're right.
Contenders offered for Olynyk. Contenders did offer for Olynyk.
Yeah.
I think some of those offers were more but lesser assets, and a lot of them presented some financial difficulties of like, well, if you go find a place to dump some long-term salary, then call us back. But anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off, Ken.
Yeah.
Well, I did mean to cut you off, but no, I'm done cutting you off.
Okay. So, as with moving over to Ochai, the quick, easy way to look at that is to say you gave up the 14th pick 2 years ago. You're going to get the 27th, 28th pick. That doesn't sound great. But the thing I've always felt about Ochai, without even seeing him on court, there was never going to be quite the level of organizational buy-in to him as if the Jazz had owned that 14th pick and made that selection themselves. They didn't get to go shopping with that draft pick in 2022. They got the guy who the Cavs had drafted after the fact because they went shopping on a list of just who was on the Cavs roster and who the Cavs would even entertain in that trade. So they took him, and they should have taken him because why not take him? And if Cleveland was willing to say yes and give him a run, but there were always a few things that were going to make life a little hard for him. He's a little older. He's nobody ever thought he was going to be a great shooter. For a little while last year, he looked like maybe he was going to beat that. He certainly hasn't ever since. I think after last year's trade deadline, his shooting really dropped quite a bit and made it harder to get him on the court and provide any sort of spacing. And that basically, sadly for him and for us, continued into this year. So there was kind of a need, or at least a, an opening for them to say, well, yeah, maybe we are trading the 14th pick 2 years ago for a 28 pick this year, but if we don't think he's going to be a contributing rotation player going forward on at least a 20-minute and up range, that might be the right move to take just to roll the dice again.
Yeah, I mean, look, also this week we saw a recent number 7 pick just get released outright because his team needed to take more bodies than they were sending out in trades. I think at a certain point, it behooves you to stop thinking about a guy as a function of where you drafted him and just make some cold hard analysis on where you think that player is headed. And in a way, it's kind of laudable that the Jazz didn't get hung up on, what they or to your point, what Cleveland might have thought Oach was going to be at the time of the draft. I like Oach. I think the Jazz like Oach. I think that people in the Jazz front office continue to believe that Ochai will probably have a long NBA career because he has elite athletic tools. He's got, he's on track to be probably at least an average defender, and the shooting will come and go. But if you can be an average wing defender at 6'5" and at least an okay shooter, you're probably gonna make it to a second and potentially a third contract, and you're gonna be around the NBA, and you're probably gonna help some teams. I think that for the Jazz, what they did is they just determined that that player that I just described, average defender, average shooter, and he's 23, so this is probably there's not that much more runway left on the projection, right? If that's what he's tracking toward, is that one of the 6 or 7 best players on a championship team? And if the answer is no, then I do think it's okay to just go take more shots. And when I say more, the shots that you take don't have to be 14th picks for it to be, worth the shot. So I think that's the calculus. I still was surprised when I heard a few days before the before the deadline, that Oach was being discussed. Just because in my mind, if you're a team in the early stages of a rebuild, usually the type of guys you want to accumulate and hang on to and look at longer are the kind of guys who are still on their rookie contracts, guys who are still kind of exploring their ceiling. But I think the Jazz they're confident in their projection that he's going to be a really good, he's going to be a good NBA player. He's going to be around for a long time, but that he's probably not going to change anyone's titles odds on his own.
I have a bunch of Ochai thoughts that I feel that I need to say, and I feel like a lot of fans want to hear, because he is definitely the lightning rod of why fans are upset. I feel like a lot of fans from my straw poll of just reading things and hearing things and talking to people at work, they hate this deadline for the Jazz. And a lot of it has to do with Ochai, second-year player. Why are we getting rid of him? And I think it's extremely possible that Ochai is a 30-minute player, not a 12-minute player. He could go in Toronto. He's going to be their 6th, 7th, 8th best player, depending on how you feel about Grady Dick. How do you feel about Kelly Olynyk, right? Like, is he better than Kelly Olynyk? Well, maybe in that construct he will be, right? Like playing alongside Quickly and Barrett, and they're going to need more of him to put the ball on the floor because they don't have a true point because they waived Spencer Dinwiddie, right? So it's possible that we're going to have egg on our face for giving up on him, and he's more of, because of his physical tools, he's a guy you want out there constantly putting his physical tools as pressure against another team for 30 plus minutes, and he's just not a 12-minute spurt, come in, do his job, and go home. Like, it's possible, right? This trade is definitely signifying that the Jazz do not believe in Agbaji as being a part of the future of the Jazz. Take that as you will, right? And it's kind of hard for us to see and prognosticate on where Agbaji's going to go. It's very possible he's going to figure this out and be a great player. He hasn't really shown it yet. He's old enough where you kind of want to cut bait a little earlier. To Ken's point, maybe he wasn't even on the Jazz's draft boards at the time he was drafted. Maybe they graded him out as like the 35th best player. He was definitely in late first round, at least as far as the boards are concerned, at pre-draft process and everything for a lot of teams. But how you feel about this trade is about where you feel on Agbaji. And as a fan of a developing team, of a building team, you want to see these guys you brought in as rookies and see them bloom and see them perform and say, that's a guy we brought over from the Donovan Mitchell trade as a rookie. And we traded for him because we believed in him, and you want to see it through. And I would rather be on the front end of a trade where you think he's not really going to blow up the way you think and have egg on your face than trade him 3 years too late where you're getting nothing for him, or you have to do a salary dump, or he has a weird end of a season where in a contract year, and then you end up paying him $18 million a year because of what he did in 23 games, and then you have to trade him and a first-round pick just to get rid of him. Those feel much more painful to me than when a team decides 2 years in to a guy's rookie contract, I think we can just do better, and we're not trying to win a title right now. Let's try to do a little bit better than that. And I understand the pain it causes because he's cool, he's athletic, exceedingly nice person. He's very attractive. Like it sucks to lose a guy like that so early for what, late first round pick. What's that going to do? Probably in a bad draft. That feels bad. I get it, and it could hurt Utah going forward. I support it, if only because I tend to trust people who watch basketball better than I do.
I do want to come back to this idea of, trading a guy 3 years late. I want to give Ken a chance to say his piece, but also real quick before we get to those points, Kelly Olynyk played 22 minutes tonight in his first game in Toronto, 11 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals. Ochai Agbaji played 19 minutes. So he was, the eighth most minutes on the team. Och was, had 8 points in 19 minutes, was 0 for 5 from 3. So again, no one's going to judge this trade based on one game that guys played after flying across the country. But, just thought that was interesting in terms of how much will Toronto use him. But Ken, do you feel the same way in terms of just the way you feel about this trade being a function of how of a particular individual's belief level in Ochai Agbaji in 2024?
Probably primarily. There are a few people out there, a few voices that I think just become attached to every single Jazz player. So those people are a little more upset about, or not, a little less upset, but still upset about Simone, and probably third Kelly Olynyk, because I think, at his age, he probably had fewer people who thought, boy, we should hang on to him. I've laughed in several of the national podcasts I've listened to, have referenced how the Jazz gave up on a young player in Simone Fontecchio because they're just being lazy and assuming since it's his second year, he must be, you know, 21, 22, 23, whatever. He's obviously a
Right.
little older than that, and they didn't do their homework. But yeah, no, I think that's probably Ochai's. How you feel about Ochai is probably the biggest bellwether. If we did a regression analysis, that would be the biggest driver of how people feel about the trade. But I think the other two figure in to an extent as well.
Yeah. And again, while my personal opinion is that the Jazz did well from an asset standpoint, getting a couple of the best assets that moved this week, I do also get that, like, oh, you're probably going to get the 27th pick from the Clipper. It doesn't sound overwhelmingly great. The one thing I wanted to come back to, and then we can move on and talk about, if you guys want to move on. I mean, we can keep talking about this too, but I do want to talk a little bit about what the next 29 games look like now that they've made these two trades. But you made a point, Mark, about, do you do this? Do you move on now because you've just made a determination, or do you wait too long and trade a guy a year too late or 2 years too late and really miss that value window? And it's interesting. I do think that the organizational DNA around that particular continuum has shifted in the last few years, because I think Dennis Lindsay was a GM who was very in love with his guys, very enamored. Oh, he's going to turn it around any minute now. As soon as Dante Exum is healthy, as soon as this guy puts it together. And now in the Danny Ainge era, I think that there is a little bit more of insert all the Danny Ainge jokes here, but I do think that there's some truth to just like the cold hard analysis of like, is where we think this guy is heading worth costing ourselves the opportunity cost of not just getting something else? And what's super interesting to me about this, and probably deserves some more explanation at some point in the off season, or when we have more time to breathe through this, is that there is a common thread between the Dennis Lindsay front office and the Danny Ainge front office, and it's Justin Zanuck. And I'm fascinated. Someday we're gonna get Justin Zanuck some truth serum, and we're gonna talk about exactly how and when that shifted, because I do think that undercurrent is not only important as we think about this trade, but I think as the Jazz approach this rebuild, there's a chance that they could approach it on an emotional level very differently than they approached the Dennis Lindsay rebuild that Justin was there for part of. He did have a little sabbatical where he went and worked for the Bucks for a year. But I don't know. If there are any thoughts on that, I'm happy to entertain them. But yeah.
No, I was actually going to mention the Bucks angle as well, because I do wonder how much of that none of these individuals are monoliths. And we think of these general managers almost as if we do the players, as if they're not human beings whose values and constructs evolve of how they view these things. Putting Milwaukee aside, I'm very interested in how that experience. Again, I would also love to give Zanuck truth serum and just kind of understand his thought process on these things. But that exposure with Dennis Lindsay is like, did the mistakes in the Lindsay era, right? Like, okay, holding on to Favors too long, re-signing him to too much, and then giving it, having to dump Favors for a first-round pick that we are very much going to talk about as to the Jazz future plans this year. Does that kind of allow him to be more on the Ainge side of things now? Let's do trades for peak value with Gobert and Mitchell, right? And to a much lesser extent in Baji. I guess I'm just trying to close us out by with my previous statements, is to say, like, I don't disagree with any Jazz fan who thinks that this sucks, that we lost 3 rotation players who were all positive influences. There were none of those 3 players provided negative enjoyment for Jazz fans, right? Like there weren't curmudgeon-y attitudes, there weren't selfish play for most of the time. The most you could say about any of these three players is something I've complained about. Is Kelly Olynyk fouls too much? Maybe he complains a little, and just some little quirks around Kelly Olynyk's game. But otherwise, I just enjoyed having Kelly Olynyk. I enjoyed having Simone Fontecchio, and I enjoyed having Ochai Agbaji, and I don't like not having them anymore. And I get that sentiment. I care more about my fandom of Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler and where that's going to go instead.
Sure.
That's fair.
All right. Well, let's talk about where this leaves the Jazz. And I'll just start us off by saying I went and looked because I was talking with someone out on the socials about whether or not this means the Jazz are tanking. I think, last season when the Jazz traded Mike Conley et al. Away at the deadline, it was pretty obvious what the intention there was, right? This season, they traded guys away who have cumulatively, I looked this up at Dunks and Threes, just because I wanted to pick a metric. You can do this with whatever. Do this with VORP or win shares or whatever your metric of choice is. I used EPM wins added. Kelly Olynyk, Ochai Agbaji, and Simone Fontecchio combined had a wins added through the first 50 games of 2.6. Extrapolate that for, on a prorated basis, what they should have contributed if everything stayed the same over the final 30 games, and you're talking about a win and a half. Now, in fairness, the Jazz are also one of the teams that has most exceeded their their expected wins based on point differential. So maybe there's also just some softening of the record coming just naturally because the Jazz are playing with house money a little bit right now. They also are about to embark on a week or two where guys are going to be playing with like "Hello, my name is Otto" stickers on their t-shirts, and that's So I'm not saying that like, oh, the cost of trading those three guys is just a win and a half. But I guess the question for me is, and I'll let you two help me answer it. The question for me is like, what do we expect? The Jazz they made this trade at 500. They're now one game under 500 because they lost a game that frankly means less than nothing to like all the people who are ready to send the jury to deliberate on those trades because of the Phoenix game. Like, come on, guys! Like that was not a real NBA circumstance. But yeah, so they're 26 and 27. I mean, is this team? What do you think? Is this team trying to orchestrate things to where they finish at 34 wins and keep that pick, or is trading your 7th, 8th, and 10th man something that you can by minutes played? Obviously, Simone was starting, but by minutes played and touches and other things like these are not central pieces. Can you trade away three guys from kind of your second tier, and still hang if you're then distributing minutes to whether it's Taylor Hendricks or maybe Otto Porter will play. I don't have any intel on whether Otto Porter wants to be here or if he's going to eventually ask to be, let go to play somewhere else. That's the analysis that I'm doing, and I keep trying to phrase this as a question, and then I just keep talking. So let me shut up and let you two kind of engage with that question.
Ken, I'll let you take the first response to the non-question.
Well, yeah, thanks a lot. How do I answer the non-question? I think we got 29 games left in this season and 3 before the All-Star break. And then, I always find myself thinking that during the All-Star break, there's a chance to get things in a row. And that doesn't really happen because they don't practice during the All-Star break. Everybody goes their separate ways for X number of days. And they actually lost a day of their All-Star break with the rescheduled Golden State game next Thursday. So we've got 3 games: Golden State Monday, Lakers Wednesday, Golden State back again Thursday this coming week, then an All-Star break, then 26 games. It's going to be a little tough for them to come out swinging super hard. I think in these games next week, because of, like you said, the "Hello, my name is Otto" uh, thing, and because you're replacing a Kelly Olynyk with a Taylor Hendricks for at least some of those minutes. You're replacing Simone Fontecchio with maybe Bryce Sensabaugh minutes, maybe Taylor Horton Tucker more minutes. Who knows where they exactly go? They are a team that is a bit bereft of wings at the moment, of really true wings. So it's going to be interesting to see. The report in the online and in the, well, it was in the press conference today, is that Otto Porter is not fully healthy, and so he's not expected to have a large role for the rest of this season. Didn't say anything about whether or not he might ask for a buyout and then be miraculously healed like Gary Payton II was last year, the second he arrived in Golden State. Um, so there are gonna be some challenges getting everybody back, on the same page. Maybe elevating a couple of rookies, maybe elevating a couple of back of the bench guys, maybe elevating even a two-way guy to get some minutes and some production there. Also bringing in, I mean, the one guy from the trade we think who might come up with a few minutes or at least is healthy and has not been waived is Kira Lewis Jr. So pulling that all together, how quickly can that come together? Again, with 2 games against a Golden State team that is right now playing much better, a game against the Lakers, and then beyond, it's going to be tough. I mean, I think there will be an opportunity. I shouldn't say opportunity because I'm not trying to imply that I think they're programming this, but there will be there probably will be a slide. In fact, it's already started. Golden State won just as about the time we were going on, and Golden State has passed the Jazz in the standings, so they're now sitting in the 12th pick in the NBA draft, which way they were then conveyed to OKC. And now the next 2 teams in the standings behind them currently are Chicago and Atlanta. Chicago won tonight. Atlanta lost tonight. So there's just a lot of things that can happen. It's a pretty tight window as far as if we're going to talk about the pick conveyance, to think they're going to get down into the pick conveyance window because of the distance between them and some of the teams. Not all of the teams. There is a possibility where if they decided to put their finger on the scale one way or the other, I think they would have some control. But that depends too on what the other teams do eventually. How was that for an answer to no question at all?
I think it's entirely fair as a good response to a lack of a question. There's a lot of little factors here, right? As to how many games are the Jazz going to win, right? Because unlike replacing the guys who sent out with players who have played a lot of NBA minutes and Damian Jones and Juan Toscano-Anderson last year, who provided their own moments of brilliance and defense or offense, and so we were all so surprised as to how often Utah was winning games with nobodies out there. And a lot of credit goes to Hardy. A lot of credit goes to those guys who filled in, who Utah fans weren't terribly familiar with, but who had real experience playing NBA basketball. This time around, you're replacing them with rookies and with players who are proven to be not very good. And so you might have more of a sinking stone with some of the replacing those 3 players who weren't in top 5 or 6 in minutes played and touches with players who are net negatives. Rookies are going to be net negatives when they get on the floor. The only counterpoints to that are the Jazz traded 0 ball handlers, right? We've talked about their issues with before the season of not really having a lot of competent passing on the team, and Kelly Olynyk was by far and away the best passer for his position on the team. But I think we've seen a lot of growth from, obviously, Keontae George as a rookie. We weren't expecting him to have point guard chops at all based on his Baylor tape. Maybe at all is a little strong. He definitely has some passing chops, but he's playing like doing real point guardy things, which I think was a surprise to everybody. He got some starting experience, and that certainly helps. And we've seen Colin Sexton grow in notable ways, even if he's not a pure point guard. And Chris Dunn is out there doing Chris Dunn things. So I think that, and Jordan Clarkson is still there. And So by keeping all your ball handlers present and even adding someone with starting experience in Taylor Horton-Tucker, I certainly got my problems with THT, but he has actual minutes experience and passing experience that you're not losing a lot of what Mike Conley gave this team, and we suddenly lost. And Nickeil Alexander-Walker was also traded. So in last year's trade. So you have sort of the guys who are dribbling the basketball are kind of staying the same, and maybe you will have a couple more turnovers and such. But I think when you're talking from a pure wins added standpoint, you're asking guys like Bryce Sensabaugh and Taylor Hendricks to stand in the right spots and shoot the ball and maybe set a screen or two. And I don't think the offense will necessarily suffer there. And by the way, Lauri Markkanen will get an all-star break to heal up that shoulder that's been bothering him all year. I don't see a lot of sinking stone because you do have your dribblers on the court and your best player to be healthy. Also, Jordan Clarkson is having the literal worst season of his career by magnitudes. And to the extent that dude is exhausted from FIBA play, this week and a half plus off, which Clarkson always travels to somewhere really relaxing. He's not really a partier type during the All-Star break. He likes to relax quite a bit doing whatever. He might hit up a concert or two, and you'll see his appearances. But if he actually needs a break and we get real Jordan Clarkson for the second bit of the season here, there's a lot of things that can lift up this team as well. There's a lot of little angles to talk about draft picks and stuff too, but that's my first thought is just with respect to the ball handlers and Lauri Markkanen being still here.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think the still here part of this conversation is something that's not getting enough play right now. Kelly Olynyk really contributed to winning, and in fact, there was a stretch in the Phoenix game, which again, I don't care about the Phoenix game as a proof of concept for the remaining part of the season. I really don't. I think, as I've said to both of you in separate conversations, like that's a game where guys went back to the hotel to take their afternoon nap. Not sure yet if like THT probably went, left shoot around, not knowing if he was going to play 0 minutes or 30 minutes. And if he did play 30, am I going to be the point guard or am I going to play the wing? Am I going to guard KD for part of the game or Bradley Beal, or am I just going to be parked on Josh Okogie? Are they going to trade Jordan Clarkson and now I'm going to have to run 40 pick and roll? All of that guys did not know at, noon on Thursday, and then they had to play a game that night. So I don't care about the game. But what I did notice in the game is there were a couple of stretches during that 14-0 Phoenix run where you just felt like, okay, this is a point in the game where, Keontae's been wilding a little bit. Jordan's missed a couple. Colin, I think, dribbled off his foot twice in the game. This is a play where you would give the ball to Kelly on the wing and you would just let Kelly run something, right? So the Jazz will miss that. And I don't want to understate that. But when I look at here's who the Jazz still have. You mentioned the 4 guards, right? Sexton, Dunn as starters, JC and Keontae George coming off the bench. Although Will Hardy did hint that maybe they're going to look at some different configurations, lineups, starter changes, whatever. They also still have a literal all-star, not an all-star this year, but an all-star level player in Lauri Markkanen, who, is shooting 50, 40, 90 over the last 30 games. John Collins, who's defensively flawed, but he's, a double-double more often than he's not. And Walker Kessler, who's really important and who's about to be emphasized. I think, a lot of people are talking about Taylor Hendricks, but I'm here to tell you Walker Kessler is one of the winners in this trade. He's about to see his role increase, right? So those are 7 guys. And I would argue that they are probably 7 of the, depending on how you view Olynyk, 7 of the 8 guys who contributed most to winning over the first 50. The other thing about those 7 guys is I went and looked at the performance of all lineups that are just made up of those 7 guys. So let's take the 3 departed Jazzmen out of the mix. No Luka Šamanić, no Omer Yurtseven. If you can make 5-man lineups out of just those 7 players, the net efficiency of those lineups is just a little bit better than +5 per 100 possessions, which is a good but not great. It's +5 means you're a 48 win team, right? So to me, the question is, how much are the Jazz resting on those lineups? How much are we going to see those 7 guys have their roles emphasized versus how much is this going to be, a development exercise for Hendricks, for Sensabaugh? How much are we going to see THT get back in the mix? All those things. Because the core 7 guys who I think have had the most to do with who and what the Jazz are through 51 games are still there.
That's a good point. The other thing that came to my mind as you were talking, though, is you'll also probably see a little erosion of that 5+5 because you're going to be throwing in, at the very least, we know Taylor Hendricks is going to be added into that. Probably get some Taylor Horton Tucker once in a while, maybe Bryce Sensabaugh. I mean, I think we anticipate he's going to get some level of look over the next 29 games. Just a question of how much is going to be, is he going to get 10 occasionally or 15 regularly or whatever. But no, it is that's encouraging to see. I had thought about looking that up earlier and I got sidetracked and never did, just to see what this group of people have done on the court together.
Yeah, and obviously the thing we're most excited to see, or what fans should be most intrigued to see, is putting Markkanen, Collins, and Kessler together. And before I get into the fit of those 3, just philosophically about what this season is about. Like, I know getting home or getting any playoff experience for these young guys would be great. Getting playoff experience for Lauri Markkanen in Salt Lake City. Let's show him what we're about, right? And give him confidence to that when he inks that big extension this summer, that he's like, this, we're gonna have some great playoff moments in Salt Lake City. I get that part of it, but I don't want to lose sight of the point of this season, which is still just to figure out who is going to be part of the next Jazz championship team. And that's a harder question, right? And so you make the trade for John Collins as a straight up talent bet where you're not giving up anything as far as roster spots or draft picks, anything material, I should say. You're taking on a lot of money, though, for the next few years. Like, that is why Atlanta was having such a hard time trading John Collins, is they were seeking some sort of actual material benefit for losing a good player, but his salary is quite large. And so what I'm looking for, and this could be a winning combination or it could be a losing combination. So far, when it's on the floor in limited minutes, it's been a very much a winning lineup based on per minutes played. I need to see, as a fan, I need to see Kessler, Collins, and Markkanen playing a bunch of minutes together to prove that there is no such thing as a 3-4 between Markkanen and Collins. They're going to do different things against different opponents on different nights. They're going to defend different players on different nights. Markkanen can defend big centers in ways that Collins can. However, you might see Collins matching up against different sort of offenses where he needs to be just a little bit faster as the ostensive, like, starting quote unquote power forward, right? So I want to see how they work those lineups in. And notably, these lineups will now have Chris Dunn and Colin Sexton running those lineups instead of Taylor Horton Tucker, who provided his own spacing issues, right? And calling his own shot, maybe not enabling some of these dependent threats, such as Markkanen, Collins, and Kessler. Markkanen has done a great job, by the way, of establishing more of his independent threat offense, but Collins and Kessler especially are dependent threats on good passing and at least keeping the ball moving, which Sexton, if he's not passing well, he's at least drawing defenders, making things happen in ways that THT hadn't done before. So that could be a winning or losing thing. Who knows? Like, Collins has been his plus minus is awful, but let's put him with good players and good lineups and more frequently, and that could lead to very, very different outcomes for the remainder of the season. Even if we have some sort of evidence that it should be positive based on limited minutes in the beginning of the season.
Sorry, I was muted there.
Yeah,
I agree with all of that. I think that I'm also fascinated with the Markkanen thing and seeing if they can get experiment a little bit more with some potential creation juice. It's not something he's really been asked to do a lot. I made the comment when Eric Walden was tweeting out some practice facility stuff of Markkanen kind of at the nail, playing around with some jab steps and facing up and those sorts of things, that maybe that's a sign that the ball is going to shift more to Markkanen in certain situations. I guess we'll see. But I agree with you on the Kessler Collins Markkanen thing. And I've said this a lot, and it's not because I'm particularly vested in like that trio. It's just that I think Kessler needs to play a lot more coming down the stretch. And I don't think that they're going to turn Collins into a 19-minute per game backup. So by necessity, those two things mean that those two have to get some run together. And maybe we'll figure out that it doesn't work. And then maybe that changes the way you think about Collins moving forward. But I think it's a question you have to answer over these last 30 games, among other questions.
Yeah, and keep in mind, just because you lose Olynyk doesn't mean that you necessarily have to immediately just give those 25 or 20 minutes to Taylor Hendricks. Like, there's a way to cobble together 96 minutes, right, between the 4 and the 5, right? And if you're going to start Markkanen, right, you're bleeding into some of the 3 minutes. But there's a way to give those 3 guys, and those 3 guys what is the next? It definitely includes Markkanen unless something wild happens with up-leveling Markkanen to like a super triple mega star. But Markkanen's, we know he's there. Is Collins a part of it? Well, he's going to have to get some burn. Is Kessler a part of it? He's going to have to get some burn. And I accept a lot of the post FIBA woe is me kind of status of Kessler, and Hardy has. I really trust what Will Hardy has done with Walker Kessler. The stats say Walker Kessler should play more. Hardy's obviously seen it. He's seen the statistics, and you don't even need to see the numbers. You watch Walker Kessler out there just destroying the minutes he's in and providing real value. I'm going to trust that the coach kind of knows, and Walker Kessler's a guy who wears his heart on his sleeve, but Olynyk's gone. It's time. We're going into the offseason. It's time to now say, all right, man, you had your warm-up. Can you play with Markkanen for 40 minutes, for 35 minutes? Can you play with Collins and Markkanen for 20 to 25 minutes? We're going to figure this out for the next championship Jazz squad. This is what this season's about. The stats look good so far, but we need to see where those combinations are for where this team is going to be next year, 2 years from now, instead of what's going to happen over these next 29 games. Well, I think we'll win quite a bit, but I care more about who is relevant 2 years from now. That's more important to me than wins and losses right now.
Yeah, and I think that's what that's from a front office perspective. This is about learning some lessons. This is about and learning lessons they need to know. They didn't need to learn a whole lot more about Kelly Olynyk. They felt like they didn't need to learn a whole lot more about Ochai Agbaji. They felt like they didn't need to learn so much, I guess, about Simone Fontecchio. But they do need to learn and put these guys in some game situations now that they've had half a season plus to develop. Get Taylor Hendricks on the court. Come up with how you feel about him, and also a way to make a good list of what he needs to go do this summer, both on his own, in summer league, in OTAs, to come back next year. He and Bryce Sensabaugh both missed out on summer league this past year, so this is kind of it's not their rookie season, but it's their rookie summer to really be able to get into the workshop and try to add some things, do better. And they have the benefit of having gone through a season, 60% of it probably in the G League. But so that's where they need to learn some things. They need to learn about Taylor Hendricks. They need to learn, with Bryce Sensabaugh, whether he's a guy they might be saying, well, did we keep him, or is he somebody we could use to move and get another shot at somebody else? Particularly now that they just added 2 picks in this current upcoming draft. They might retain their own pick just depending on how things shake out. Well, they took 3 last year. They've got 2 or 3 now this year as of today, and they've got 3 picks next year. Guess what? They're not going to have 9 guys in their first 2 years next season, or a season
Right.
beyond that. That's not going to happen. So they've got some decisions to make even on these younger players, or they will at some point. They need to start gathering data.
Dan, we were talking pre-show about late first round picks. Maybe he was on the show, but definitely at some point we talked about late first round picks.
I want to hear this.
Being traded for 3 or 4 future second round picks. I am not looking forward to social media when we find out that Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji are ultimately traded for like 3 second round picks after the Jazz trade their late first round pick this year. It's going to be absolutely miserable. Ken, I agree with you on like we need to find out the minutes here. I just want to poke at you though about Dan's central question though of like what do you think it means for where the Jazz are trying to go up or down in the standings if we end up having to give them more minutes though, because that's something that I just don't have an answer for. Do you have an idea?
I mean, I think they moved down a little, but as far as I would expect their winning percentage to shift down. Where they move in the standings depends also on what particularly Atlanta and Chicago do. Atlanta and Chicago are now the next 2 teams below the Jazz in the standings. My opinion, they should have very little reason to be hell bent on winning at this point, particularly Chicago. Both teams are currently the 9. They're the 9 and the 10 in the Eastern Conference, standings. So they're play-in teams today. But right behind them, you've got Brooklyn, who is out of the play-in, but they don't own their own draft pick, so they have no reason to lose. I would kind of expect a flip-flop there, but for whatever reason, Atlanta and Chicago seem to be wanting to win, even though they could dive a little bit and improve their draft pick. Um, so it's going to depend on those teams. That's the biggest variable. I've said all year long that I think going into the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season, the Jazz might have the opportunity to, even that late, decide which way they're going.
Toggle.
Yeah. And as of today, we were talking about this separately last night. Dan and I were. As of today, I re-looked at it, and I still think that could be the case. I mean, it's not going to be the case if somebody goes off on some huge winning streak, or somebody like the very next game, Chicago lost tonight, and somebody went back and said, "Okay, that's it, we're done. We're benching DeRozan, we're benching whoever else." And I was trying to think who else, but they've already, Levine's already out, and Lonzo's already out, so there's not a whole lot more guys to bench. But I mean, top end guys. So there could be an opportunity unless somebody really puts their finger on the scale in a huge way sooner than that. But right now, I still think the Jazz can kind of play it out, certainly past the All-Star break, and then decide at a later point. And I still think they'd have success in saying, we're at 11 and we want to go to 9, or we're at 9 and we want to get to 11. Just and the benefit they have of that is that they get a little more data on scouting the draft. They get a little more data on what their current guys look like. Just it depends on whether I'm right or not, how late they can do that toggling.
Well, to that point, I think people forget that even last year, the Jazz were within a game of 500 as late as 35 and 36, even after trading Conley and Beasley and Bando and 35 and 36. Then their last 11 games, they went 2-9. Was that them, toggling to steal the word? I mean, maybe it was. I think you're right. I think that the Jazz have some options here. The vibe I get is that they would be fine if they stay outside of the top 10 and they convey that pick if it's because, some of the young guys contribute and they're good and have some juice because of Hendricks and Keontae George and Walker Kessler playing more minutes. And I do think also, I do think Bryce Sensabaugh is going to be more of a priority than THT. I think THT got those minutes on Thursday, largely because Bryce was out with a hip injury. I think we are going to see Bryce. That doesn't mean we're never going to see THT, but we're going to see Bryce. But back to the point at hand, yeah, I like in terms of floor and ceiling here, it is starting to feel like Golden State probably has a leg up, meaning that the 10 teams who are going to own the playoff and play-in spots are probably the 10 teams ahead of the Jazz right now. Golden State has won 4 straight. They've got their guys back, but more than outcomes, they're a basketball team that makes sense again now that Draymond is back and doing Draymond stuff.
That's
so
scary.
so sorry, doing the good kind of Draymond stuff.
Okay.
We also if you want to update your sign about like days since last strangulation, like he did make it through another game without strangling anyone tonight.
Yeah, he came close, of course, in the game against Nurkic. As we're recording this, he did up his antics after having X many days without an incident.
He also got right in KD's face at the very, very end. He deflected I was watching this while we were getting ready to get started. He deflected a pass to KD on the last possession, probably with some contact, but they didn't call it. And he had something to say to KD about it. But anyway, yeah. So Golden State probably like the 10th spot or better is probably theirs to lose at this point, which means that the Jazz only really make the play in if someone falters, and that's fine. That probably means that if you're looking at the pick, you know, the worst case is the worst case is it's like 12th and it goes to OKC, 12th, 13th, something like that, and it goes to OKC. The best case, I don't see them catching Brooklyn, to, you know, back to Ken's point about the standings and, you know, looking at Tankathon and whatever. Like it's a 4.5 game difference. Brooklyn just traded some guys. They're not motivated to lose, but like, so yeah, I mean, I think that they are right straddling that zone of like, does the pick go or does it stay? It's really 50-50. And I think when it comes down to the last 9 or 10 games, if you're that close to, you know, sending OKC the 11th pick, you might just decide, let's keep it this year.
Yeah, I think and just because I don't think we actually said what the obligation is. Utah's pick is owed to Oklahoma City if it's falls outside of the top 10, and Utah keeps their pick if it's within the top 10. So I think we've alluded to it enough that anyone listening or watching can figure that out. But that is from the Derek Favors salary dump a few years ago.
Let me just quickly add, because I had a lot of confusion about it just today on Twitter. Then it's 1 to 10 protected again next year if it doesn't convey this year. That was reported by somebody as 1 to 8 next year. So 2024 1 to 10 protected. 2025 1 to 10 protected, 2026 1 to 8 protected, and if it does not convey that year, it just turns into $890,000 in cold hard cash. So go ahead and continue, Mark.
I actually did not know the cash ultimatum. I just assumed it turned into 2 seconds like most of these other things.
It originally turned into a second, but they later traded that second to OKC in another deal, and so they had to come up with another way to compensate.
A second. Yeah.
I mean, I'll take $890,000 anytime, guys. Yeah. But so I'm actually really glad you spelled that out, because that is going into the point I was just going to make, which is I think there is a lot of virtue in just giving the pick and extinguishing that obligation. Now, Utah has an extreme surplus of first round picks because of the Gobert and Mitchell trades, but also having your own first round picks gives you another option when you're trading with a team or making your own selections, is to say, hey, between us, Cleveland, and Minnesota, like, let's talk about the range of picks here. But because of this obligation going so far out into the future, being this protected for so many years, it curbs what Utah can do with their own picks if they can't get the pick to actually just convey. By all accounts, the top of the 2024 NBA draft doesn't look all that great. Having a top 10 pick isn't all that great. Having a lottery pick isn't all that great. Now, we've seen historically that even if the lottery talent is not that great in the NBA draft, that doesn't mean that the back half of the first round is similarly worse than comparable end of the first rounds in other drafts. It just means that there isn't as much blue chip talent, but there are red chip talents, there are green chip talents still. That tends to stay the same from draft to draft. So having late first is fine, but if you were to get rid of a pick in any draft, it seems like 2024 would be the year to do it. So there is virtue in just saying, look, I need to give Oklahoma City this pick so that we free up our opportunities to trade future picks without any encumbrances, or draft them or use them ourselves, right? And so I think there could be. I honestly don't know how the incentive works. I think the prevailing sentiment is if you're close to a top 10 pick, then you should keep your top 10 pick, because even in bad drafts, some of those top 10 picks could be pretty great. But I don't want to discount the idea that, hey, just giving the pick in general is totally fine, because that frees up everything you have to do with Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City, to their credit, or credit's the wrong word, but they traded two of their obligations in the first round, or two of their incoming first round picks, in part because they were slated to have upwards of 4 first round picks this upcoming season. They don't have room for all of them. So they kind of did some finagling around for that. So that's where I come out on the winning and losing thing. Is I do take Justin Zanuck at his word in his press conference when he says, if we win, great. If we lose, great. It really doesn't matter to me. I think that probably is true from an organizational perspective, because we've talked about the prevailing, the countering sentiments between giving the pick or keeping the pick and getting rookies exposure versus these veterans playing well together. I truly don't think they care if they make the playoffs, but Dan, as someone in your experience, I've never been in an NBA locker room. What does it mean to these players if they feel like, well, management doesn't care if we win or lose? I mean, I still think there's a lot of talent in there, and they're all pretty healthy. They're going to try to, unlike last year, we had some pretty banged up guys that also led well to the tanking, I think. But now it seems like they're a little bit healthier, and I'm really not sure how the players would think about perhaps being ambivalent about winning.
I mean, but being ambivalent about winning at what level? Because I think one of the sentiments that's out there right now a little bit, even from some of the beat writers, is like, oh, Lauri's never been in the playoffs. He really needs to taste that to be happy and to commit to Utah long term. And I get that, but also, like, just going and playing a single playing game and getting your ass kicked by the Lakers in a playing game, or by the Warriors, or by whatever, or let's say you upset a couple people in the play-in, and you get in a first round series and you go get swept by the Clippers. Like, do we think that experience makes Lauri go like, all right, guys, I'm now a playoff minted? No, I think that's frustrating too. So, those guys all want to win. They all want to get to the playoffs. They all want to taste that. But I think that you're also hoping that they're smart enough that they're going to appreciate being put in a position once they get to the playoffs to actually matter in the playoffs, to be relevant in the playoffs, not to just get a participation trophy because you played in a play-in game or two, or because you got gentlemen swept by the Nuggets or the Clippers or the can you imagine if the Jazz made it to the 8th seed and the Wolves were number 1? Like, can you imagine all the angles that would be played in that series? But whoever it is, like, I just I don't know that participating and getting your ass kicked is enough to make Lauri, Jordan, Colin, Key, whoever it is, go, oh, okay, like, now I'm part of a playoff franchise. So now I'm happy. Now I'm satisfied with the direction this is going. I think that all those guys want to be, would rather be really good for a long time than just be like, I was a member. I participated in the 2024 playoffs. That's my guess, and I think that's what the Jazz front office is banking on. Now, what I will say in the same breath is, we can debate when the right moment is to convey the OKC pick. The reality is that pick is going at some point, unless you're okay being, a team in the middle for 4 straight seasons, meaning last year, this year, and you'd have to be, one of the 8 to 10 worst teams the next 2 seasons as well. Doesn't mean you have to be really bad. You can be a 36, 37 win team for 4 straight seasons and not convey the pick and instead convey the $890,000 in cash. I would argue that some of these guys, principally Markkanen, I would be nervous about asking Markkanen to live through 4 37 win seasons personally. I don't know that the Jazz share that nervousness, but my hope is that their thinking is that eventually we're going to send this pick. So it's not about, are we protecting this so we can keep it? It's more about, when do we want that pick to convey?
Yeah.
According to this guy.
I agree. There have been people on Twitter who have said they should be angling to not convey the pick at all, but I think it's
a lot of
it's a lot for the players. I mean, to be honest, it's a lot for the fans. I mean, we've seen some fans that we used to see on social media who have become a little less engaged the last couple of years. Now we're only 1.5 seasons into that, 1.6, let's say. You add 2.4 more seasons onto that. They'll come back when there's winning, because that's, I think, what fans do. The fringe fans, that not the weirdos like us who watch every loss in entirety, and then some of us get on and do a show after the loss is over, and then we write about the losses, and we figure out the plan forward. Here we're on a Saturday night here, damn it. We're obviously this is what we're doing. So I think people will come back, but it is a lot to ask 4 years straight of that.
Yeah.
So the corollary is obviously the Ty Corbin Jazz, right? Those middling bad years where it was several years in a row. And dang it, Lauri Markkanen throws a wrench into everything. He did from the moment he arrived in Utah. Because he's that good. He is that good. And it was a simultaneously healthy and incredibly stacked Western Conference that Lauri Markkanen didn't get an all-star spot this year. Right, you win 2 or 3 more games. If he doesn't get hurt in the beginning of the season and the Jazz win a couple games that he's healthy in, he's an all-star. And if he's in the Eastern Conference, he's not an injury replacement. He is an Eastern Conference all-star with these statistics, bona fide, right? So 30 teams in the NBA, and you have a young 7-foot sharpshooter who, besides a ball handling kind of off the dribble scorer, passer, that type, somewhat of Markkanen's archetype is second, third hardest to find in the NBA over what contributes to winning. It really is difficult to think we have a 35-win team cobbled together by a bunch of okay guys versus we have a 35-win team because we have one absolute bona fide all-star level and a bunch of young guys. It's this really tricky timeline that the Jazz management have to work on that I'm not going to have a Wembanyama discussion, but it made tanking for number 1 overall pick status last year impossible because he and Walker Kessler were that good. And the ancillary pieces, when they played minutes, they were that good. Mike Conley, we were trying to get actual stuff for Mike Conley that wasn't there. And so we played him and they were that good. And so you're in this difficult position right now where Lauri Markkanen is, you got to do something with him right now. And he's going to get this big extension that he's going to sign regardless if the Jazz make the plan or not. And I guarantee you he's going to sign this renegotiation extension for a buttload of money. But then it becomes, okay, he's occupying this percentage of the cap, and now we have to do something while he's young and efficient and great. And do we have the pieces right now to do so? I'm not sure they do with the current roster, but you really got to figure out, okay, you don't have time to give Abaji 2 more years.
Yeah.
You got to find out right now who can play with Markkanen, because he's going to get expensive. And this whole post-Gobert Mitchell rebuild was supposed to be maybe 4 or 5 seasons of 25 wins. But now that this is like, okay, minimum a 35-win team, nobody wants to be there. Nobody wants to be in the 35-win. Yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry, Mark.
No, I was rambling. So go ahead, please.
Okay, no. I would just add to that, like, also, like, Will Hardy might just be too damn good to tank, right? I mean, like, but multiple people have said that to me as well. And last season they handed him a very flawed roster with a Lauri Markkanen who hadn't really done anything yet, a broken down Mike Conley, a Jordan Clarkson who at his best is awesome and at his worst is not awesome. Like Jordan is what he is. He'll shoot you into 6 games and shoot you out of the next 7. Like, we love him, but that's what he is, right? To get that team and have them at 35 and 36 before you decide to pull the plug in the last 2 weeks of last season, or last 3 weeks of last season, to me also speaks to just how hard it would be for the Jazz to finish in the protected range for 4 straight seasons. So I also think that you at some point have to figure out, like, okay, who's helping Lowry? I do know that the Jazz's hope is that at some point they can become a buyer in the trade market. And to loop this back around to where we started with the trade talk, like, the Jazz wanted to be a buyer in this trade market. That would have been their preference. They have picks, they have good players attached to decent salary, stackable salary, but like not unreasonable salary for the level of player that they are. They wanted to do that. They hoped they could do that. They still hope they can do that. Those deals weren't available this year. The best player who people thought might move was Mikal Bridges, who's a 0-time All-Star, even though he's really good. He's never made an All-Star team. DeJounte Murray, a 1-time injury replacement All-Star. Neither of those guys moved. Zach LaVine didn't move. Obviously, got like even the sort of fringe difference makers didn't move. And I do think that eventually what the Jazz hope happens is that they'll be in a position to accelerate the timeline with an acquisition at that level. And that's what will define how quickly Lauri Markkanen is playing in a conference finals, right? It's probably not going to be Bryce Sensabaugh or Ochai Agbaji who determine how quickly Lauri Markkanen is playing in a conference finals. So at a certain level, I'm okay with a little bit more of a detached analysis of, like, like the Jazz. I don't want the Jazz to fully turn into a team where, like, as soon as a guy can be traded for like 110% of his real value, they do it each and every time because, damn it, like, that's a positive return and I'm going to squeeze every drop of value out of this team, even if it means, like, we're forwarding mail for 20 guys all the time. But I do think that at a certain level, what drives the decisions over the next couple of years has to be, what gets Lowry to the conference finals before his 30th birthday.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say before I can let Ken have the final word is, if they were that calculated, right, we would have seen Chris Dunn, who was picked off the street for nothing, traded for a garbage second. Like, oh, well, he's 110% of the value. There he goes. No, there's value to Chris Dunn being on this team, win or lose. We would have seen Jordan Clarkson, who I mentioned earlier, is not just having a bad season. He's having, like, are you okay? Like, is something wrong with you type of season, where it might behoove someone who a management with his salary going forward, which is reasonable, but still it's a chunk of money to say, I got to get off of that if I'm getting anything. No, they kept him around for all the Jordan Clarkson reasons you'd want to keep him around. So I don't think that they're just like as cold and calculated as just like, well, we're gonna get the 110% regardless. Like, I think there is some real spirit here, and to the Will Hardy being a good coach thing, you mentioned what he did with the flawed roster last year. I think more important, this, I don't know if this is true or not, but to me, more important than the flawed roster kind of being weird pieces fitting together was he brought this team, brand new coach, first time coach, he's in his 30s, gets all these guys in here and none of them know each other, brings them into training camp, and he gets them to just believe that, like, we're all really good players and we're going to do something and we're going to win something together. And to any sort of discredit about that Utah's a way station and Ainge is too calculated, and this is a place where you don't know where your next paycheck's going to come from, if it's going to be from Ryan Smith or from some other owner. I think Will Hardy, not only is he a great tactical guy, great lineups guy, I think he really means something to the players, whether they're here for a month or they're a guy like Lauri Markkanen that tends to be here for years. And I think that really means something when you're in a team that's in fluctuation, like Utah. If you have a leader that's leading your practices day in and day out, who you feel cares about you, I think that can deaden the impact of maybe some of the feeling that this might be just a calculated business.
No, I agree.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, I think he's been a strength to connect with a majority of players. I wouldn't say all, because nobody connects with everybody. There have probably been some people along the way who felt like, I got to get out of this place, and maybe they did. But he's certainly connected. I mean, I think the biggest example of that, the biggest example of that is Lauri Markkanen. But I think the second biggest example of that, more recent, is Colin Sexton. I think Colin Sexton has really connected with and listened to and allowed himself to be coached by Will Hardy. And to the extent that continues happening, but not just with Colin, but with other players, hopefully that continues to pay dividends.
Yeah, and by the way, Will Hardy and Colin Sexton are have the same age difference as Ken and I do, and Ken and I shared a bunk bed growing up. So that's just to put it in context of what it means for Colin to be yelled at in the middle of a game by Will Hardy and accept that and take that feedback at face value and keep they're basically sibling age apart. Will and Colin and Lauri and Colin, and Lauri and Will, all of these guys and Will are practically the same age. So yeah, we've been talking to you nice people for a really long time, so we can wrap it up there. Anything else, any other final thoughts from either of you that you meant to include in this conversation that we should hit before we go?
I just hope that we see a healthy team the rest of the way. I really want to see what these lineups can do. I would be sad if we had some injuries kind of mute what we can expect of the Jazz going forward. Because if these players, if this roster is what it is, and we get 80% of the games from them, we're going to see a lot of things to talk about over the summer of where the Jazz can go.
Kenneth?
I was just saying, I think I'm good. I will echo what Mark said. I hope we see healthy players, and that gives the front office the ability to evaluate the things they feel like they need to evaluate. We talk about decisions they need to make, whether they're keeping this player, giving a qualifying offer to that player, trading this player. But in reality, every single player, they're making a decision every day, because there's always a way to, there doesn't have to be an event like qualifying offer or should I guarantee their third year salary, both of which are things that are on the table this summer. There are actually, I'm not sure there are any qualifying offers this summer now. Because
Kyrie Lewis Jr.
Kyrie Lewis, that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I was thinking of Simone, and then that's not applicable anymore. So yeah, they have decisions to make out of every single player. So I hope they get the data they want. Yeah.
Go ahead. Finish your thought. Finish your thought.
Hopefully they get all the data they want, make the best decisions they can, and we're all just peachy keen happy with all of them.
Yeah. I was gonna say too, it occurred to me, I'm checking on this. I'm pretty sure Johnny Juzang is another player who so he's and Micah Potter and Jason Preston. So all three of those guys are also guys that the Jazz could give qualifying offers to. And in the case of Juzang and Potter, because this is their second season on a two-way for the Jazz, the qualifying offer for them is not a two-way contract. It's a standard NBA contract. So you probably want to know enough about them to know if you offer them like an actual NBA contract or not. But anyway, that's probably a minor concern, because we're now talking about like the 16th and 17th man on the roster.
Yeah.
All very good points. I think, it is a fact-finding mission from here on out, which is not the same as saying it's a tank job. I think the Jazz will try to win games, and they'll try to put players on the floor that give them a chance to assess things properly and make decisions about the future. I'm excited for it. I love watching teams in this phase because I think you learn probably even more than you learn when you're watching a really good team just go out and kick everyone's butt. So to me, this is an intriguing time to be a fan. We'll certainly have a lot more to say at Salt City Hoops about whatever way that goes. So please join us again, read our stuff, follow these guys. And thank you for joining us for this special Salt City Hoops program, recapping the Utah Jazz's trade deadline and looking ahead. Thanks.